happened in a limited degree. Nutrients, they were recognized as important production from the 20s. There was some really interesting work, actually very detailed work that was done by Rich, who Jude got credit for because he was the senior author of the way things worked back then, but all the work was really done by Rich. First sockeye system was fertilized in Bear Lake, Kodiak in the 1950s. It was considered marginally successful because of poor responses of zooplankton. Turns out that zooplankton quite often, when you have successful projects, doesn't change if you aren't controlling stocking levels because of trophic cascade top-down effects on the population. You can still have increased production. Great Central Lake in Vancouver is one of the longest ones. I think it's the only one going on still. Its production was really pretty obvious how beneficial it was, but not quite so, according to a few reviewers, that a lot of the other non-fertilized lakes in the same area also responded very quickly. About the same time fertilization was active. So we need to count, obviously the lesson from this is a lot of the variability. I have 80%, I heard the previous speaker saying 55%, but a whole lot of the marine variability, depending on which system you're at, is related to marine conditions, and that's becoming more and more true. We've seen the huge variations of back-to-back runs on the Fraser with similar smolt numbers. This is a statement from Jude, a paper by Rich really, is that the rich crop of plankton produced by these lakes is in due to, at least by the fertilizing substances of the salmon doing it. We have better data since that time, but this is the kind of photos they saw of the system. Now you can go back to Carlick, and during some of the peak runs that have been occurred recently, you would see similar things. But for the most part, there was a huge amount of fish coming into those systems, 1.5 to 2 million that really choked off, and particularly some of the smaller little embayments. The level of nutrient loading was obvious and huge. I took this from Garden Botoro. If you want to get some really interesting reading, I'll put in the plug. This is all available. There's chapter 7 online of their history of sockeye salmon research. It's a very detailed, detailed piece of work. If you want to learn anything about how salmon systems have developed over time and the kind of research that went on over time, they documented it. It's an incredible history, as well as I completely agree with their conclusions, which helps out. There's also multiple fertilization programs that occurred in the 70s up until present. Over 20 lakes are fertilized in both British Columbia and Alaska. Arrow and Kootenai Lake, where I currently live right now, has had a long-term, over 20-year fertilization program on one, and I think the other one's 13, 14 years. And they're still ongoing, and unlike most fertilization programs, since hydro is paying for it all, they're more obliged under rules and legislation to continue it. So it probably is one of the few that are going to continue into the future, as long as the data suggests it's beneficial. There's other plumbing studies that were done. I call it recent, but it sort of dates me because it was after I got out of the Lake Fertilization Division of WASP and Vernon Lake on Vancouver Island. That's a really good study that you want to see how to do a good study. I think it's a good one to look at. Why we shouldn't fertilize, or shouldn't fertilize. Is this enhancement or restoration? I'll address this at the end of my talk, but basically it's all depending on your perspective. Historically, enhancement was good. Fisheries were assumed to be fairly benign to freshwater ecosystems. And more recently, the thinking is basically enhancement is bad, restoration is good, getting nutrients up to their quote natural states. Fertilizer, which is how we refer to as nutrients, which is kind of a misnomer because really nutrients and fertilizer aren't synonyms, but it's thought to have a high-tech fix for other problems for decreasing productivity. This was kind of a summary of a symposium that was done by Stockner, by Lackey at the end of it. That's another good read if you want to collect up on the history of nutrient in some ecosystems and its importance. That is kind of a very simplistic type of way of looking at things because, commercial fishing is sort of a high-tech fix to keep overstatements from happening. It's not really. It's a way of thinking about things, but I don't think it particularly has a lot of validity. By using lake fertilization, a lot of these have been in the same presentations that I heard, the negativity about lake fertilization. Agencies will basically ignore the fundamental cause, which is overfishing, or in the case of reservoirs, not properly dealing with the management of downstream lakes. So why we should fertilize? I'll go back and forth between why we should or shouldn't, because commercial fisheries remove almost always at least 50% of the nutrient load into the lakes. That would have been that coming from naturally from the ocean. This typically equates to somewhere by the marine nitrogen signatures in the sediment. You can see that it equates to approximately 25 or 30% in most lakes. Carlet being an exception, it was over 60-65%. So a lot of the nutrient loading from carcasses is not always the dominant factor, nor is it really a controlling factor. But in a few lakes, it certainly is. It is also seen that in there is kind of a conundrum between loading lakes and with carcasses versus overstocking them with the litter. This was an assessment of Ricker in a 1987 paper that I think still holds today. If you actually load lakes to maintain maximum sustained yield, like on return per spawner data or even smolt per spawner data, you will in fact be nutrient depleted. Those carcasses that would be able to maintain and be excessive in terms of the number of fry dumped into the lake, they would certainly be necessary for nutrients in the future. So he identified that the role that artificial fertilization would have to maintain lakes in the future. Why we shouldn't fertilize? Well, increased phosphorus and nitrogen is considered to be in many areas of the world, including most of the central part of North America where there's any agriculture, and a lot of the East Coast streams as a pollutant, and it occurs, and justly so, but eutrophication is a huge problem in lakes in that area. Adding nutrients also has risk of eutrophication and may adversely affect sockeye production and other species. And in practice, adverse effects are rare, quickly corrected if proper monitoring is occurred. I know of a couple of cases, one in ours, which was I think it was Deer Lake on southeast Alaska, where spreadsheet error tripled the load. Of course, the lake turned green about the 1st of July. Well, it's easily cured. We just put adding fertilizer, and by 3 weeks later, it disappeared. But it gives you an idea of the kinds of errors that can have. I know early in some of the stocking of the lake fertilization, they got bluey algae blooms in some of the lakes here in BC, and that is a factor. One of the things that usually isn't talked about is water pollution, is lake eutrophication, intensively removing nutrients through different systems, either by commercial fishing or through dams. This distilled water is really not good for living things. So this is a simple picture of sockeye salmon fertilizer effects. It's so simple what could go wrong. This is I stole from Clean and Svanek's 2004 paper. You add increased nutrients, you get grazable algae, zooplankton, juvenile, and returning sockeye. Increased nutrients, this is more complicated picture of what happened. One of the common things we've seen is you may grow algae, blue-green cyanobacteria. In an edible algae, there's forms that are too large for the zooplankton to consume, and you're going down a blind path. You don't get any benefits from it. Also, your nutrients may be dwarfed by mass by large escapements, as I'll talk later about garlic. That was one of the factors that the reviewers in the most recent proposal to fertilize Garlic Lake said that carcasses do it all, ignore the fertilizer. There's no evidence the fertilizer does any good, just put more fish into it. And also nutrients may not be the limiting factor in sockeye lakes. Usually we can, with preliminary limnological data, we can determine that. That type of information has been very well worked out in the limnology literature, going back to the experimental lakes and work in the early 1970s, which kind of solved most of the arguments about what was really a limiting factor in productivity in lakes. Grazable algae, well, as I stated, it may not be grazable. Zooplankton, there may not be enough numbers because of overcrowding of them by putting too many fish in the lake. So consequently, you may fertilize and get no benefit because all it does is go into phytoplankton and isn't consumed by zooplankton. They may be too small to provide optimal food supply. Quite often in heavy cropping situations, you get forms of cladostomins that aren't particularly effectively used by fish, and you may not recover rapidly from overharvest of fry. We have, particularly in barren lakes, when we stocked fry into some of the lakes in Prince William Sound, we found the native zooplankton population collapsed and didn't recover after 3 years, even with no stocking. So there is a top-down effect. It can be pretty dramatic. Juvenile sockeye, they're not the only fish in the pond. Stickleback are one of the competitors, and in some certain cases, although limited in terms of numbers, there's evidence that fertilization is going more to stickleback than going into sockeye. You may not be fully utilized zooplankton because of weak ocean survival and spawning area limitations. They may have to compete with mysis, which is a big thing in most of the kokanee lakes in central BC and the state of Washington and Idaho. It's been a huge effect, and now on Flathead Lake, where you're seeing tremendous disruptions of these systems that have produced fish for a long time by introduction of these. Neomysis is another species that occurs naturally, and again, maybe a very much of a competitor, and they outcompete sockeye, so you're putting nutrients in that you really don't see a response. And again, they may overcrop zooplankton, and phytoplankton. This trophic cascade idea has, seems to be at least a lot of our real problems we've had, particularly dealing with hatchery stocking. People would like to overstock. They don't like to Clorox fish, even though we have abundance of evidence that overstocking can cause a lot more harm than understocking, particularly with sockeye, these deep water lakes. Returning adult sockeye, there's no reason why a sockeye carcass is any more of a pollutant than dumping any other organic material in the lake. We had on Kodiak Island, had a call once, they sampling one of the small creeks, and it was not meeting water quality standards, and it went through a pasture. The guy said there was hardly any evidence of the pasture or the livestock doing damage, but it was completely saturated with pink salmon. And of course, all the water pollution quality and why it was failing to meet standards was related to those carcasses. We wanted to know what to do about it, and we said nothing. Obviously, those fish have been spawning there for years, and it seems to be holding real well. There's no problem. Anyway, may not return to sufficient numbers because of climate or disease. We've obviously seen a lot of evidence of that. A lot of the effects of changing climate, particularly in localized areas, are becoming a major factor. And when you rely on returning adults to determine successful project, you may get very ambiguous results. So you really do need a stock program for doing it. You also may provide excess stocking and trophic cascades, as I stated before. You don't necessarily just get nutrients from carcasses, you get other effects that could be equally effective. Why I jump over that? No. How do I go to previous? There we are. What is the future? Okay, Carla, in 2015, I provided an EA. I have a disclaimer here. I did work for Kodiak Regional Aquaculture Association as providing some analysis for this. So I might have too much at stake to be an objective outside reviewer. But a few things I noticed in reviewing this was released in 2015. Peer-reviewed reports by myself and Kim Hyatt were basically cited kind of out of context and support the fact that fertilization is either highly risky or having a high probability of not being effective. This analysis used sections of reports to support a no-action alternative. In 1985 to present, they primarily relied on the fluctuations of the population rather than look at the full time series. They didn't address nutrient removal by commercial fishing harvest rates. It was all addressed on fertilization, and then the fact that nutrient depletion from 70, 80, 90 years of harvest was a factor. They use bad logic to infer fertilization has impact by saying less than 1% of the nutrients end up in fish. Well, that's pretty much true if anything that's two trophic levels removed. you get about a 10% energy transfer, and consequently if you're tracking phosphorus like anything else it does. It didn't address the fact that when you add phosphorus to a lake, it gets quickly absorbed in hours, and it turns over very rapidly in producing phytoplankton in a daily type of time frame. So you get a lot of production from a lot of little phosphorus, well known by limnologists, but really the idea that you can kind of diminish the effect of fertilization by tracking the mineral down to it, and it shows up in fish. He also referred to fertilizer supplements as enhancement rather than a restoration action. We didn't have as much problem with that, but a lot of people did because it clearly was targeted at restoration. This shows you just some of the data that supports this contention. This is a 500-year record from the Finney's work where he did corning work. And if you look on that time frame, it's pretty obvious the decline that occurred at the start of commercial fishing in the early 1900s. And the quote recovery that you see at the end of it is really not in any kind of a time scale of the kind of nutrient loading you get from carcasses under the modern commercial fishing era. This is another view of the same one. This actually looks at some of the other data in addition to the nitrogen, marine nitrogen levels going to it. Over the last 500 years, you can see plasmina flux, the densities in the pores, and the carapace length, attenual length, and neutral length, all showing exactly the same trends, not within the historical 500 level, so you can't really jump an argument out of it. This is a normal type of variation if you look at a longer time series. Carcasses, and basically the other argument was that the fertilizer didn't do any good. It was all carcasses. I'll just point out some things here. In truth, there is a bit of truth to that. You can see this band here is the level of fertilizer going through it. And when it was put in, large runs did return because of high marine survival, and that probably equals at least, if you say a 1-to-1 ratio of the total phosphorus concentration in fish carcasses, you're doing that. But there's a few little distortions that probably should have been corrected in this original paper. One, carcasses don't provide the same efficiency. A lot of them go into maggots that fly up on land, bears eat them. A lot of the load doesn't show up from carcasses directly in the water. Secondly, if you look at where we started, that load is fairly large compared to what was moved from carcasses early on. And secondly, once we just decrease the spring load, which is the dominant factor, which is building every year, once we terminated fertilizer, even with large escapements, it started declining. So the Fish and Wildlife Service's 2015 Carlin Lake conclusion said it should be noted that egg deposition, fry quantity, and smoke equivalent to carcass deposition versus escapement and not fertilization. And cited me. There's no such thing in that report, by the way. That's just something they concluded by looking at some of the data for it. The actual report said that we could link total phosphorus to both annual loading, as I showed in the earlier graph, and primary productivity, which increased because of both carcass and fertilizer. The report concluded if runs are weak, nutrient addition should be considered as a restorative method until escapements are inadequate. Again, sort of misusing the information. So my perceptions, and this is kind of maybe a little bit of a negative view on the future of fertilization, being a little, after spending all that effort and energy going into trying to have a very modest lake fertilization program in Carlet, to have it shut down based on at least maybe protection type logic. This is what I've concluded. The whole view of nutrients being restoration versus enhancement is kind of a red herring argument. It all depends on your perception. If you want to consider commercial fishing nutrient mining and desertification of the lake using extreme language, you can basically say that it's always a restorative type of thing every time it's fishing. If you want to use the argument that carcass nutrients are simply a matter of harvest policy, and that lake fertilization has no point in the whole argument, it's always an enhancement argument. It just depends on your perception. The reality of it is we've worked out over at least several decades the limnology and the fundamental ways to effectively add nutrients to lakes to get societal benefits from them without creating harm. It isn't always effective. As you saw, that whole list of other things that can go wrong. Despite all of those types of things, with a robust monitoring program, you can end up with a very good outcome. And if you aren't getting a good outcome, you can curtail it. I know of no case where that would have long-term harm. I basically, however, find that non-fisheries production criteria, which I don't have a problem if you don't fertilize Carlet Lake because of aesthetic values, you don't want planes flying over, you want to keep it a natural experiment. Those are all reasonable points of view. What I don't like is the distortion of data to support your view, to say you have to sort through it to find that somehow you don't think it's going to work, and second guess people who actually know what they're talking about. Finally, I think the future regulatory positions, at least that I've seen on federal lands, is this growing trend toward let nature handle it, basically back off and do it. It's the same argument that I see logic for no GMOs. And that probably if somebody here is anti-GMO, I apologize, but there's a huge abundance of scientific evidence for global warming, GMOs, and vaccines that seem to be rejected by a high percentage of the public. Yet the science is just enormously behind those types of concepts. The science is enormously behind the high probability of getting significant benefits, and the decision should be made on cost-benefit analysis to fertilize or on pure policy issues. You don't want to put fertilizer there for other issues, I have no problem with it, but I think it's a good program. That concludes. We'll take any questions.